Welcome back to this episode of Uncover the Human. This week, we are joined by Michael Niyompong. He comes to us from the Mental Health Center of Denver. He is the Chief Engagement Officer over there and has a lot to talk about well-being. Welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
So you are the Chief Engagement Officer. The Mental Health Center of Denver has a significant mission around well-being. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your journey into finding well-being and why that's been important in the work that you've found yourself doing now.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for that question. So as you mentioned, I'm the Chief Engagement Officer at the Mental Health Center of Denver, and I've had the privilege actually throughout my career that I kind of fall into these opportunities where somehow I've managed to set myself up from prior opportunities. And this is no different, where unbeknownst to me, I think for a good decade or so in my adult life, I've been kind of on this journey of well-being, of really trying to figure out, what does it mean to me? How do I make myself happy? How do I keep myself well, and just how I thrive? And so it all came together for me at the Mental Health Center of Denver, where I started here over 3 years ago, and really was able to put, frankly, a label on this journey that I've been on around well-being, because I think prior to this point, to me, was just about a lot of it was about just finding happiness and trying to find joy in life, and ultimately that's what's well-being, right? Is how do we thrive and be happy in life?
It definitely is. So how did you find it specifically? What was it about this job and this company?
So again, going back to I live somehow this very, very blessed and privileged life where I have many, many mentors, friends, coaches, and family, and some who very much guide me through and have been with me through my entire journey, both personally and professionally. And so with this particular opportunity, I got connected to it through two different people, actually. So one is my current boss, Dr. Carl Clark, who is our president and CEO here at the Mental Health Center of Denver. And so both Dr. Clark and I actually have the privilege of being Livingston Fellows, which is actually a fellowship program that's administered by the Bonfils Stant Foundation here in Colorado. And so we met each other through that program. And so Dr. Clark was definitely one of the people I reached out to. This would have been roughly 2017, 2018, when I started to explore new opportunities, or my next opportunity, basically. The other person that basically helped connect me with this opportunity was essentially my predecessor in the role here, Lydia Prado, who then was the Vice President of Strategic Community Partnerships, my former role here. And so I basically took over for her here as she continued her work in the community. So those two people, again, I consider friends, mentors, coaches, and one happens to be my current boss. And so that's how I got connected to the opportunity. And it's interesting because as I look back at my prior opportunities, that's been kind of the similar way that I tend to come upon the next opportunity to rise again. So that's why I do underscore that I'm very blessed and privileged and lucky to have these mentors, friends, and coaches, and frankly, this network that I'm surrounded by that has, in a way, raised me within this community. So that's how I found myself here, and so glad to be here.
It's a very supportive way to find your way into well-being work. And it's super interesting that you've now landed as Chief Engagement Officer. So not only have you been on your own journey of well-being, but it sounds like that's a mainstay of what you're doing with the Mental Health Center of Denver.
Absolutely.
To help provide that for other people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what does that look like on like a day-to-day? What is that? What goes into forming well-being for others?
Yeah. I would say one of the things, one of the tenets I would say around well-being for us here at the Mental Health Center of Denver is that well-being is self-defined, right? So what it looks like for me may look different for you, right? For me personally, I have found that well-being is very much about relationships, about the authentic and solid relationships that I have cultivated and maintained over the years and over my my career. And so that really is what sustains me and makes me thrive and contributes to my well-being. That being said, certainly from a clinical perspective, right, we here at the Mental Health Center of Denver very much have and provide services to support the mental health and well-being of the communities. And so we do that through a broad array of services that we offer. So I mentioned the clinical work. So we have lifespan of services that we offer. So services all the way from prenatal care through the other end of the spectrum, senior care as well. And so, and everything in between. And so the services that we offer are geared towards those specific population. So I don't want to go into too much detail around the clinical work, because I think for by and large, most people, when they think mental health, that's likely what most people think about when it comes to mental health care, is kind of the clinical work or the therapeutic work that happens within clinical settings. What I do want to highlight more around is our work around addressing the social determinants of health. Right. So those are more as like it sounds, social determinants. So these are things like your education, your financial well-being, your access to food, access to housing. So these other factors, these social factors, if you will, that really at the end of the day have a pretty significant impact on our well-being, right? When it comes to our health and well-being, it's not just about the clinical care that we receive, whether it be for mental or physical health, right? So a lot of the social factors influence and impact that. So we do a lot of work here at the Mental Health Center in Denver, trying to address those social determinants. In fact, housing is one of the big service areas that we offer. So we administer a lot of housing vouchers on behalf of various agencies here in the state and community. We also actually develop our own housing to provide housing for the people that we serve. The most recent project that we completed was actually on Federal and Iowa. It's called Sanderson Apartments, where we built 60 units of independent living. Well, not quite independent, but it's permanent supportive housing, basically, is what it's the technical term of it is called. But the idea is that we have housing where we surround it with the appropriate supportive services to make sure that whoever we have in housing can stay in housing successfully, right? By making sure they have the services that they need, whether it be mental health services or physical health services or whatnot, but making sure they're connected to all the services to be supported and stay living in the community. And so housing is a perfect example of the work that we do specific to that specific social factor. Another area that I always like to highlight with respect to what we do at the Mental Health Center of Denver is actually around food insecurity. So on one of our campuses, the Dahlia campus, which is actually in Northeast Park Hill, we actually have dedicated an entire acre of that particular campus to an urban farm. So it actually has a farm as well as a greenhouse. And the greenhouse itself is actually special in that it's an aquaponics greenhouse. And so for those of you who are not familiar with aquaponics, it's where we actually not only grow vegetables, but we're also growing fish in the greenhouse. And so it's actually a closed system where, essentially within the ecosystem, if you think about it, it's using water. So water is the main ingredient, if you will, right? And so the fish certainly are living and growing in the water. And the plants actually act as a filtration system, if you will, in filtering and cleaning the water, right? But at the same time, those nutrients, if you will, that the fish are providing is what's feeding the plant. So we do that at the Dahlia campus, and it was in recognition of a clearly identified need within that community around food insecurity. In fact, not sure if you are familiar with the term food desert, right? So the food desert is this idea that you don't have access to fresh food within a mile walking distance. Well, in Northeast Park Hill, we actually say that it's actually a food swamp, because not only can you not get access to fresh food, the only type of food you can get access to is actually fast food, right? So more toxic food, unhealthy food. So we tend to call it a food swamp. That has changed, definitely. So that was the case, I would say, definitely about 3 to 4 years ago. But it was because of that identified need within that community that we said, you know what? one of the ways that we, the Mental Health Center of Denver, are going to help address and solve this issue is by growing food right in the community. And so that was then where the idea was born, to really grow food. And in this case, we grow fresh vegetables as well as fish for the protein side of food. And so we work directly with the community to make sure that that particular campus was from the very get-go informed by the community, right? In fact, it was so informed by the community that the community actually adopted the campus from the get-go. And a couple of really fun stories I like to share about the Dahlia campus is that one, the Dahlia campus was actually named by the community. So we actually work with community stakeholders to name the campus itself. The community chose the name, the Dahlia campus for health and well-being was the name that they chose. So that's what the campus itself is called. The other really cool story that I like to share is during construction, I'm sure for many of us, we've heard stories of construction site thefts, right? Where supplies and materials tend to, grow legs and walk away. And I wouldn't be surprised, perhaps right now, during where we are around lumber and everything, given its shortage, of how lumber might be one of those construction supplies and materials that tends to not stay where it was last left. And so at the Dahlia campus, because we worked with the community from the get-go, even before we broke ground, we never had any issues around theft during construction, right? So I think that really speaks to how the community truly adopted that campus and felt like it was theirs from the very get-go. And so when you talk about community, that's another piece where I think it is vital to well-being overall too, right? In terms of it's essentially the collective relationships, right, that we have that form the communities that we have that, again, ultimately attribute to our well-being. And so I always like to highlight those programs in addition to the great clinical work that we do, because I think those are the programs that most people don't necessarily often think about when you think about the Mental Health Center of Denver, right? Even the educational programs that we run. So we actually have, as another example, at our Dahlia campus as well, we have what we call the Skyline Academy, where basically it's where we offer a day treatment program for children and students, right? So these are typically students who need some additional support, who aren't quite doing well in a regular classroom. So they can come to us at our Skyline Academy to really receive the care and education they need, right? And the goal, very much so, for everyone we have at Skyline is to help them build coping mechanisms so that they can go back into a regular classroom and continue their education there. So that's yet another example. And then we have a lot of community programs where we're embedded in various schools, community centers, residential care facilities, and whatnot. So that really is, I think, what I often like to highlight when it comes to well-being, right? Because sometimes people, I feel like that's basically a huge connection between mental health and well-being, because I think sometimes people don't quite make that connection, right? Well, what does mental health have to do with well-being? And it's like, that is the connection, is kind of these community supports that we can bring to link mental health to well-being.
I really love that. Just all the programs, first of all, are fascinating. That's really incredibly interesting stuff. But I really also love the tie-in between the two themes. When I asked you about well-being in the beginning, one of your first thoughts was about your mentorship, the people who've been around you, your community, and that's exactly what you brought to the rest of it. And it's I think also I definitely was I kind of surprised myself. That was a great aspect of what mental health as well as physical health that you don't think about. You think about even if you don't just go physical and you go like, well, there's also mental health and therapy. Like so much of that is locate or the focus is on the individual. And when you get that community feel, that's such a great way of like just enhancing all of the pieces of life that end up informing well-being. And it's interesting because that was the first thing you highlighted when you talked about your own personal journey towards well-being as well, was the community you had to support you along the way.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we talk about a lot internally here at the Mental Health Center of Denver is, so the Mental Health Center of Denver is something that within kind of the healthcare system is called a community mental health center, right? Distinguishable from, say, hospitals who might have like, psychiatric care, like inpatient psychiatric care and whatnot. And so there's a total of actually 17 community mental health centers in the state of Colorado that covers the entire state. And the thing that we say often internally here at the Mental Health Center of Denver is, how do we make sure we don't forget the community part of community mental health center, right? That we don't just purely focus on mental health center, but that we remember that we are the community mental health center. And so therefore, when we think about then access to services, like how do people get access to our services? That's the number one place we start with. It also happens to be, unfortunately, probably the biggest barrier to just mental health, right, in general, right? People just, actually, I'm going to flip that around and say, we put up some significant barriers to people accessing services, right? Just because, I mean, the root cause of it, frankly, is because the healthcare system overall was not created to be patient-centered, if you will, right? Yeah. It is very payer-centered, right? In a sense that, well, how do we get paid? Right. So the customer here is basically, flipped. And so because of that, unfortunately, what it means is access to healthcare, just overall, whether it be physical or mental health, is very difficult, just because the system is built not for the patient, but essentially system built to get paid, essentially, right? So we unfortunately then have a lot of access barriers to access, and that's something that we think about often here. My team in particular, we are the engagement communications team, and so we essentially oversee all of our external relations work for the organization, as well as internal communications. And so because we oversee all of our external relations, we tend to receive a lot of, frankly, those inquiries where somebody might have not been able to figure out how to get access to care and whatnot. And so we field a lot of those inquiries and get insight to a lot of those unfortunately negative experiences that people are having. And so one of the things that I often work with my team on is, with these negative experiences that people are having, how might we then work internally to fix those? And some of those are easier to fix than others, right? Like the harder to fix ones are definitely the ones where it's like, yep, that's a federal requirement. We need, X, Y, Z, and we have to document all those things in order to get paid or whatnot. Those are typically harder to fix. And then there's sometimes much easier things to fix where it's like, oh, yep, that is something our access team wasn't aware of, and that's easily fixed, where it's a minor fix within either, maybe our interactive voice response system. The prompt was wrong, we need to fix that or something. So we certainly do our best to fix that. And then as a healthcare organization, we also have an advocate, a patient advocate as well, who is also available for people, both people who we serve as well as just the general community, but primarily for people who we serve, who, if they, once they're in already, aren't having the best of experiences, the idea is that they have an advocate internally to help fix that. And obviously our intention and our goal is never to make it difficult, but yeah, as a bigger healthcare system, sometimes there are some cracks that even we're not aware of, and some people fall into them, and we definitely get those people out of those cracks and try to patch those cracks up. So
it's really interesting that you mentioned access, because the whole time you were talking about access, I was thinking about a couple of things. One is when you talked about your journey into finding well-being and pursuing well-being, which I'm sure it's not a destination of, end of the marathon medal of like, I found it, I'm done, on to the next.
Over the rock.
It's just an everyday thing, but it's how your access to your coaches and mentors and the community has helped you with that. And I also think of how the opposite of well-being. So what causes the lack of well-being and the struggles with well-being, and the pandemic highlighted that from a psychological and human point of view, it's really come up as being the isolation, so the lack of access. So isolation due to the pandemic, but even before then, I mean, the rise in loneliness, the rise in feeling disconnected at work, in communities, and at home, and the real pandemic, if we want to say this, of the focus on individual as opposed to focus on how do we build a community, and how do we make sure that even in something as simple as a project or a team, people have access. So, destroy the silos, make sure that people can talk to each other freely. All these things that when you take them away, they cause a lot of problems.
It is interesting, right? Because I feel like I hear, so one thing that you said around technology is fascinating. And I don't know that we have, cracked the nut on this either, but one of the things that's interesting to me there is technology in and of itself, to me, seems like it could be both the problem and the solution, depending on how it's leveraged and used, right? So when you talk about isolation, for example, even before the pandemic, we already knew that social media, if overused and used in a way where you're much more comparing, if you will, right, and have kind of FOMO, right, fear of missing out and whatnot, that even prior to the pandemic felt pretty isolating. Right. Imagine, and I'm sure we all have experienced this, where we're scrolling through Facebook and suddenly we're like, oh, my close friends had a dinner party and I wasn't there. So all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm excluded. Right. So I think that has existed pre-pandemic. And I think it definitely got exacerbated in a way. Right. Because then not only were we still on Facebook, we were on Facebook more because now we're at home or isolated and don't have any other interactions for our own well-being. And so I think, like everything else that was frankly broken within our society, like it got exacerbated and got spotlighted, right? Another thing that I heard often was it's like we poured gasoline over everything and lit a match on it and just everything was on fire. In some cases, literal dumpster fires, right? And so, so that's that side of technology. And then on the flip side, kind of even using, let's just stick with the same technology, Facebook, right? Facebook allowed us to, actually have video chats and video calls with one another. And so during this pandemic, even though we weren't able to safely be in person with one another, it enabled us to still stay connected so that it wasn't just a voice, it wasn't just a chat, but we can actually see each other just like we are now on this Zoom call, right? Have a conversation and whatnot. So I think that helped sustain us perhaps over the course of the pandemic. And at least for me, what I'm learning is it's still not a substitute for in-person gatherings, right? That as much as I can see you, I can watch, read your body language and, respond to all the cues. For me, there's still that in-person energy, right? Those vibes that we get and experience in person is still missing, right? And so for me personally, what I found for my own well-being is when it was safe to do so. In fact, more recently, right, where we find ourselves as a community here in the metro area in Denver around, our numbers are looking good in terms of vaccination rates, as well as positivity rates and all that. I think at this point, most restrictions have been lifted, if not all of them. I suddenly found myself saying essentially yes to every single invitation I had to go out and be out, right? And then had my other problem return of, I now need to learn how to say no again, right? Because I kind of overdid it because I was so excited that I'm going to get to actually go, have happy hour or dinner or lunch in person with somebody else who I haven't only either seen in video or via voice, and to do that again. So to me, that just goes back to underscoring, technology still isn't a substitute to me for in-person gatherings, right? So it'll be interesting, I think, as technology evolves, where it takes us, right? we've been talking, I think, for a while now around like holograms and everything. So being able to, have more 3D representations of us versus the 2D that we have now, right? And yet that still doesn't answer the question for me of, does that actually, somehow also, take care of the energy and the vibes that you would get in person or not, right? So I think it'll be interesting as technology continues to evolve. I think it's not the total answer, but it does help during these times that we're going through.
That's a really good way of putting it, because I think that I definitely suffered from the same problem of, second things started opening up, I was like, let's do it. Let's do everything. And then you end up being like, I'm exhausted and I need to start saying no to things.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. You were quickly reminded of, I learned this lesson, I feel like a decade ago, and somehow I forgot it. So let's relearn how to say no and put up some boundaries.
So are there ways that comes out in your work, with both within your team and with what you guys are doing in allowing people to form boundaries? Because access definitely makes sense, get as much access as possible. But for that exact reason, we then fall into the other side of the coin, which is if there's so much access, how do you filter it? How do you figure out what's meaningful? Is there how has that influenced what you guys are doing?
I think we ourselves, so I'll give this example. I'll start first internally with specifically to our team, but this is actually applicable to all of our teams across the Mental Health Center of Denver. So when you talk about access, the thing that comes to mind for me, because it's top of mind for me, is access to information. So when the pandemic happened, for us here, essentially it was mid-March, when Sunday night, Dr. Clark, our CEO, called or convened basically our crisis management team. And on Sunday night, essentially, we made the decision that we needed to essentially overnight go virtual as much as possible. There were services that we couldn't do virtually. So those were things like our pharmacy services, residential care and whatnot. So those continued in person. But for services that we could deliver virtually, we overnight just went virtual. And what that meant for us, technologically speaking, was we were probably about a quarter of the way through rolling out Microsoft Teams. So, and Christina, you would appreciate this from a change management perspective, where we essentially threw that, change management plan out the window and said, good luck, everybody, and just turned it on for everybody, right? And then what we told everybody was, you know what, we're going to be closed to services on Monday, so grab stuff from the office that you need, go set it up at home, open up Microsoft Teams, play around with it and see what it's like. And then Tuesday we'll start our services. And so Tuesday, you can imagine, I think we had in the morning, actually it was Monday. Monday, when we were closed for services, we asked kind of all staff to go ahead and join an all staff meeting on Teams. And again, like 75% of us weren't ever on Teams before, never really been on camera, right? So you can imagine everybody hopped on, no one was muted, nor even understood the concept of muting and unmuting and how videos work. And so it was rather hilarious reflecting back on it now, right? Where people, we were saying, oh, you need to mute. No, you're not muted. No, or when people were starting to speak and they were still muted, all those things, right? All happened during that one call. So it was rather hilarious, frustrating probably during when it was happening, but hilarious looking back at it now. So that was one thing in terms of information. And then because Microsoft Teams also, for those familiar with Microsoft Teams, essentially has like a chat feature, right? Not too dissimilar from like Slack, like a more real-time, more open communication channels, right? Which is different from email. So we are, up till March, had been a very email-oriented organization, much like the rest of the world. And suddenly we introduced another communication method into the mix, in addition to video and audio. And so now all of a sudden, we find ourselves having to look at more than one place for information, right? Where before it was like, oh yeah, everything's in Outlook. I know how to search Outlook. It's probably in an email. Somebody probably sent an attachment. If it's not here, it's probably somewhere on our SharePoint. Great, I know how to use that. And then without any training or change management, we turned on Teams and just said, good luck. So then all of a sudden, right, it was now also on Teams, and now everybody was lost because now we're like, we have no idea where the information is. Like, where do we make announcements? Where do we make all staff announcement? Where do we post information, right? So we were all in it together, and we were all, in the sandbox together, just trying to figure it all out. And I would say that over the course of the year, we certainly have gotten better at, everybody, I think, has gotten more comfortable and understands more now, right? Just with being tossed into it without any training of how all the technology works. And now we're in the process of really, I think, organizationally beginning to set some guidelines around what type of information resides, right? So to try to minimize this feeling of, I need now to check everything and monitor both Outlook and Teams for information. And so that is probably the most top of mind example for me. And with respect to access, and sometimes too much information is a little bit overwhelming. Yes. And now we're beginning to try to clean that up, if you will. I still have days where I'm still learning myself, right? Where the information is. So probably my biggest thing right now that I'm amused with is, now I have those moments where I remember having conversations. Some topic will come up or some issue will come up, and then I'll be like, I already talked about this with somebody, but I have no idea who it was and which meeting or right. And I've had times where I've actually had to call Rita, my assistant, and just say, Rita, I don't remember who I talked to about this. Could you help me remember, right? And so Rita will go through my calendar and it's like, was it this person, that person? Was like, what do you want, and so she'll search my email and all that. So it's an interesting challenge now that we have, because that has come up probably no fewer than, 3 or 4 times a week for me now, where somebody will ask me a question and I'll be like, yep, mate, yeah, talked about that, but I don't remember which meeting or with who. So it's a fascinating, I think, thing for us now that we're continuing to figure out. And so, yeah, so when you talk about access, I think we have access, but now internally anyway, with this specific example, it's like we have access, but it's like information overload, and it's in an almost disorganized way, right? So then it's like we have access, but we don't know where it is anymore. Right. So it's an interesting problem to solve for internally. I think externally, flipping it completely around to the external side and specifically to the community, when we talk about access and access to services with us, the Mental Health Center in Denver, it's definitely something I think that the pandemic, just like everything else, just like all the other inequities that the pandemic highlighted, it also highlighted the inequities around access to services. So for example, when we went to telehealth services, right, we already knew that there are a significant portion of the people we serve who don't have access to equipment, let alone connectivity, right, to support telehealth. And so with that, in the immediate term, we were able to mobilize quickly to get the devices into people's hands. So we had MiFi devices internally that we use for staff, where we quickly just said, yep, deploy those to people we serve so that we can actually connect them to telehealth services. In the long term, right, we're very much thinking through all of those as we continue to innovate on various services that we have and that the community needs. And so there are a lot of lessons learned for sure over this pandemic, and the thing that we are focused on as we move forward and figure out what this next normal is really figuring out during this pandemic, what are things that we learned that are good that we want to keep? And also then what are things on the flip side of that? What are things that we learned that we need to get rid of or stop doing or do better? So it's been an interesting discussion, I think, internally with our staff, and also with a good conversation with the community, right? Really understanding what the community needs, what the people we serve would like to see. right? So we do a lot of surveys. We try not to oversurvey, but it is important for us to hear from not only the community, but also the people we serve. So even around telehealth services and sort of what we call re-entry, because we never closed. It's not so much about reopening, it's about re-entering our physical buildings. Really trying to understand too what the people we serve would like to see. Like if did they like telehealth, or would they like to come back in person, or do they want hybrid? Right. And even that word hybrid anymore is so loaded.
Yes.
Nobody knows what that is, but it's like, it's the answer, right? It's hybrid.
Yeah, you got to pivot to hybrid.
Yeah, but what does that mean? Yeah, nobody knows.
For the next normal. Then the way we use
Exactly.
all the phrases that have come out in the last 16
yes.
months.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that we talked about in our previous conversations was how the challenge of being in the well-being service industry, and how the innate nature of the people that work in that kind of industry are that people really put others first and want to make sure that others are taken care of and they have what they need. And we it's the oxygen mask thing. It's much easier to put, to think about who needs the oxygen mask and let's put it on others first and forget that we kind of need it as well. So how are some of the things that you individually and as an organization have you done to make sure that you are okay through all of this? Because the trauma wasn't just for the outside, it was for the inside as well.
Yep. Yeah. So a couple of things come to mind that I can highlight and share. There is, vicarious trauma, right, is real, right? Where you, as you are helping others, that you begin to absorb their trauma as well in a way, right? And so there are definitely clinical practices that are in place, and it takes a lot of discipline to kind of hold firm kind of boundaries, as any clinician would, to make sure that you try to minimize any sort of vicarious trauma you receive. However, despite all that, you might still experience those. And that's when internally, what we do is we, and I'm not a clinician, so I shouldn't say we, but our clinicians help support one another through vicarious trauma, right? And so we have people internally who are very cognizant and aware of this, and we hope there are trainings and education and supports that we offer each other and one another through these types of situations. That certainly, as you have mentioned, we've seen a huge rise, unfortunately, in vicarious trauma, because we're seeing a rise in the level of acuity that we're seeing in the people we serve, right? So even, you can go trace it back to what you mentioned earlier when isolation, like that has definitely been an issue. And so we are seeing kind of rising levels of acuity within the people we serve. And so that in turn impacts our clinicians. So much so, in fact, that we are seeing some of our clinicians just flat out say, in their way of protecting their own well-being, saying, I can't do this anymore. And I'm going to leave. And to underscore that, it's not that they're leaving for any other job or any other organization. They're just saying, I don't know what I'm doing next. I'm just leaving because I can't do this right now and anymore, just because, of that vicarious trauma and the level of acuity that we're experiencing right now. So unfortunately, that is something that we, as not just the Mental Health Center of Denver, but I think as a sector and as a society, will need to figure out, because the workforce issue, like a lot of sectors, be it educational or otherwise, in the mental health space, the workforce issue has been an issue pre-pandemic, and it's been exacerbated even more now that we already had issues trying to fill our open positions, because frankly, there was not enough in the pipeline, enough to fill all the open positions that not just us, but all mental health organizations have. And now we have this other issue of now people are leaving earlier than we would anticipate because the level of acuity is so high. So it's an interesting challenge that, even with all the supports that we have in place, for our own well-being here, for our staff here, we're finding that it's still not enough to support the work. And so we do, in terms of a kind of a standard practice, we very much encourage kind of well-being for our own staff, right? So encouraging folks to take the time off, like that's a benefit that we provide everybody, right? Paid time off. And so encourage people to take those benefits and use those benefits. We do, when I talk about PTO, we do hear from pockets of staff where culturally they don't feel comfortable taking the PTO because maybe, it's subliminally frowned upon or whatnot. And so that becomes like a cultural issue that we try to address, to say that no, we, our culture actually is to support, each other's well-being. And so if you take PTO, you should, we supervisors and managers should absolutely support that. And we actually try to model that behavior from, frankly, the top down. Like Dr. Clark, will model that behavior from the top in terms of he will take his vacations, he will take time off, right? I would do the same. In fact, most recently, probably about a month ago, I just needed a day off. And so, I decided to, as a way to model my behavior in my out of office message, specifically said, hey, I'm actually taking a mental health day. So, I basically said, if you need help immediately, you can reach out to my assistant, but otherwise I'm not checking anything. It was interesting that then I got one of a peer executive in another healthcare organization got that out of office reply and actually commented on it and said, you know what? Thanks for saying that, because I need a mental health day myself. So I'm going to take my own mental health day. And so I think that's the other thing that we try to do here is really ask everybody to really model that behavior of what does it take to make sure that your own well-being is taken care of. Dr. Clark often says, don't forget to put yourself on your list. And so we often say that as well, right? Throughout the organization, as we have other people on the list, as we have other things on the list, is make sure that you're on that list. So that's, I would say, at a high level and broadly, how we help to encourage well-being with our own employees and staff at the Mental Health Center of Denver.
That's really inspiring.
Yeah. I like that. That's definitely something we hear a lot, like the importance of having that modeled, especially when it comes to things like taking time off, having that modeled from the top, because otherwise it feels like you're not part of the culture. If they don't see the time off being taken.
Right.
So it's interesting to think about well-being then in terms of growth. That when you have people, everybody has struggles in their job, everybody has things they want to improve on. How do you balance the helping people with well-being and helping people grow, helping, deliver either, I don't want to call it criticism, but for lack of a better term, just guidance.
So I think the way that we approach well-being is, and growth is that it's one and the same, right? That it's not an either or, that it's a zero-sum game. It's like, it's in order to grow, both personally and professionally, one of the skills that anybody has to master is maintaining your own well-being, right? I myself, frankly, prior to, I think, really dialing in my own well-being, and it's a continuing journey, right? Like I feel like with well-being, every time I think I figured it out, it's like, oh no, there's more to do. That being said, I've had my own, like I would say probably about a decade ago, wasn't as focused on my own well-being, and ended up really working myself to the point where I was so stressed out that it manifested physically, right? Physically, as in, like, I remembered I was driving to the office one day and my entire left arm just went numb, right? And that was a really, really scary moment for me, because I managed to get to the office, but then I sat there and thought, this isn't good. Like, am I having a heart attack? Like, am I having a stroke? What's going on? And so I went to see my doctor and everything turned out to be fine. But it was a wake-up call for me personally to say, okay, so whatever it is you're doing isn't working. So you need a reset here. And that was, frankly, again, my wake-up call to say, well-being is critical here for your own growth. And so that is very much what we encourage and coach people around. In fact, we actually infuse well-being, the principles of well-being, into what we call our catalytic coaching process. And it's actually, if you Google catalytic coaching, you'll find out a lot more about it. But at a high level, catalytic coaching, in contrast to performance review, is that it's much more about coaching people and looking forward, whereas performance review is looking back and grading, if you will, right, your performance. And so we're not as much about that, but more about coaching you for your growth. And so within our catalytic coaching process, we actually have the tenets of well-being built in. And so when we're asking questions around what goals do you have for yourself, where would you like to professionally develop, and whatnot, we're also asking you to rate and your own well-being, because then that becomes the basis of discussion for you and your supervisor to have, right? So if on a scale of 1 to 5, you rated your financial well-being at 3, that prompts a discussion of, okay, well, so talk to me more about, like, why are you feeling you're at a 3 for your financial well-being? Like, are you feeling stressed out because you don't, you're behind on bills, or what is it that's making you rate there? And so that is a very specific way, if you will, that we bake in well-being as part of the growth rate formula. That it's not that because you somehow focus on well-being doesn't mean that you're therefore going to stunt your growth or professional aspirations. It's like, no, it's quite the opposite. That you have to focus on your well-being in order to professionally grow and develop and thrive.
That's a fantastic answer. I love that. That's incredibly interesting. Catalytic coaching, you called it.
Yes.
Yeah. We are definitely big fans of anything that's not the traditional performance review. As much as we all like to be graded on our past performances, well, we were there, so we kind of know.
Absolutely.
What we did, but it would be nice to figure out what we can learn and where do we want to go, because that's really what we can work on. We can't change the past, so how about we get help in working on the future?
Yep. Yeah, it's when I got here, so this organization is the first place that I got introduced to the catalytic coaching process, because Christina, just like you said, I think everywhere else I was part of the performance review process, and where at the end of it, after all that, you got a score at the end of it, and that was your grade for the year of how well did you do. And so I get it. And so for me, I remember when I started at the Mental Health Center of Denver, and Dr. Clark shared with me the process of catalytic coaching, like verbally, as I was listening to it, it's like, okay, that makes sense. But I didn't really truly appreciate it until I went through the process, right? And at the end of it, I was like, oh, I don't. So you don't give me an A, B, or C, or you don't like give me a grade at all. But I walked away with what I needed for this coming year. And it was also, the other really cool thing is it's really aligned for me with my personal and professional goals, right? That it's not just all about what are you doing for the organization? Like, what are you going to do in order to advance the organization? That the organization recognizes that in order for the organization to advance, you have to advance. And so it's all intertwined in the same coaching process. And so
that was my exact thought. It was like, it's not really about what are you doing for the organization. It's what is the organization doing for you? Because without you, we don't exist. So if we take care of you, you take care of us. Exactly.
So so we have that framework, and then as you can imagine, some people get it more than others, right? And we continue to work on it. Like we are a learning organization, big on continuous improvement, and so we're never. We try to foster an environment where people aren't afraid to fail. Now, they're still, I'm sure, if you ask somebody, one of our staff will be like, oh, no, I'm not allowed to fail. I'm sure that exists. But truly, I think from the top, we do foster an innovative environment where we want people to try, right? And then learn and then pivot. right? So it's the same thing as failing fast, failing forward, right? We have infused design thinking into our organization and continue to roll that out. The design thinking is actually foundational to our innovation technology lab. So it's how we innovate using technology to try to meet the ever-growing demands around mental health services. So it truly is the way we try to operate, and we do have more work to do to infuse it even deeper into the organization, if you will.
Well, and I assume that's a journey. So it's not one of those, we got there. Okay.
Yep, it is, right. And so forth.
Get the medal.
Right. Yeah. And we're relatively big, we have 1,000 employees. So it does take a little, from a change management perspective, that you can appreciate. It takes a little bit of, culture just takes time to, to influence to begin with. But when you're, as big as we are, definitely, and dispersed across, 35 of our own sites, and then as well as other community sites we're at, it takes some time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this was a fantastic conversation, and I'm sure we could go on for hours and days on well-being and how to pursue it, build it, cultivate it, live it, and all sorts of other things.
I love the constant theme of just connections throughout this. Talking about community coming together to own this. You get the communications to get it out to the full staff, to get it to the community, to just, and then the connection of just, hey, I want to help you grow, you help me grow. I mean, just that seems like a running through line of, and it makes sense. We're such social creatures. It would make sense to really highlight that, grow everything else. It's a wonderful way of looking at it. I love that focus.
Exactly. Like human beings, right? We are innately social creatures. And I think sometimes we forget that, but that is what makes us thrive.
It truly is. So you did mention that part of your pursuit and journey for well-being is to be able to be your best self and show up as your best self and live your best life. So one of the questions we always ask is, what does authenticity mean to you?
Yeah, so that's yet, speaking of journeys, I would say that's yet an always never-ending journey, which I have grown to appreciate, right, is the journey towards authenticity. And for me, what that journey looks like is, frankly, has been around discovering who my authentic self is. I'm sure, like many of us, we go as we grow up, right? There, the society, family, other pressures, like, you're born your authentic self, right? The first, like when you come out of the womb, you're born your authentic self. And I think what ends up happening is as we get educated, as we get inculcated into society and whatnot, like there are pressures that begin to kind of almost call away potentially what your authentic self is, to form you into this image of what likely the most influential factor is, right? Thinks it should be, like how you should talk, how you should dress, how you should, or what you should be educated in, what your profession should be. And so for me, my continuing journey around authenticity that has been quite a rewarding one, frankly, has been continuing to almost like peel back these layers and armors and whatnot that I've collected over the years of, okay, who is the true Michael here? Where is my true voice? Lately, I've been referencing my 10-year-old self, like trying to really get to my 10-year-old self, and who just, because of how my journey, so 10 years old is a milestone for me, was because I was sent from where I was living at the time, was in Thailand with my parents. My parents sent me back to the US to live with my aunt and uncle to finish the rest of my education. So 10-year-old Michael is a pretty pivotal moment in my life, where, I mean, we can unpack this all day and still take more time. But essentially, right, 10-year-old Mike, it was a milestone in my life where essentially it was when I left my childhood behind and grew up essentially overnight. And so my journey more recently has been really trying to kind of find that 10-year-old Michael and remember what brought him joy, what brought me joy, like what toys did I like, what did I like to do, who did I like to hang out with, how did I speak, how did I talk, what did I watch on TV, right? And so for me, this authenticity journey has been around rediscovering and kind of who I truly am, and almost integrating every parts of me to my present self, and then being able to frankly show up anywhere with all of me, right? And not feel like, oh, in this room I have to wear this jacket because this part of me is not going to be welcome or whatnot, but being able to say, when you invite me, you're gonna get all of me, all the crazy side, all the fun side, all the quiet side, all of it, right? And so that to me is to use your words and your brand, right, is uncovering the human, right? That's truly been what I have been doing, and for like I said, most recently, it's been this journey of reconnecting and rediscovering my 10-year-old self.
I love that theme. Getting back to it, like it was there before, you were born with it, rediscovering.
Yep.
Well, I like the very rewarding journey. I like the acknowledgement of the fact that we are conditioned from the outside, and that once we go through the journey and we get to a certain point of realizing what that is doing for us and others, it's like, yeah, you get all of me, and if you don't want all of me, then this is not the right room. Right. Yep. Yeah. Yep. And that, as harsh as it might sound, then it's almost like, well, then that's probably your problem, not mine. Yeah, it's true. It really is. Yeah. So it's a continuing journey, and it's been a very rewarding one, and I look forward to continuing to rediscovering and reconnecting with my 10-year-old self and other selves that somehow I probably don't even remember or know about, that got conditioned away or stuffed into a closet or a locker or whatever, right? To say, yep, that part is not good. Don't come out, or but hopefully welcoming all of me out to say, come out and play. Yes. Beautiful. So where can people find you, Michael? Yeah, so obviously at the Mental Health Center of Denver, but online, folks can connect with me certainly on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Mike Niyo, MikeNiyo. Same handle on LinkedIn as well, and I welcome any and all connections. Excellent. Well, we know that those are important, so thank you for sharing those. Indeed. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this, Michael. It's really just fascinating, all the work you get to do. It's I'm jealous. That's amazing. It's good stuff. Well, thank you. Like I said, I'm very blessed and privileged to have the job that I do and to love the job that I do and the people that I'm surrounded by. And thank you to both of you for inviting me to share my story and to be here with you both. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you.